Maybe next time. Dad laughed after skipping my wedding, despite I paid for flights, hotels for all families. So I made sure they'll regret it. I paid for my parents' flights, hotel accommodations, and even their outfits so they could attend my wedding. Nobody showed up. Maybe next time, my father laughed. We couldn't miss your sister's brother-in-law's poetry reading, my mother said. I did not argue. I just did some writing on my own, and the next morning, they were shouting. Someone once said, "Your wedding day is supposed to be the happiest day of your life, a beautiful whirlwind of flowers, laughter, and love." That's what I imagined when I began planning mine. I reserved the venue early. I discovered a little area that wasn't too pricey but nonetheless beautiful. A rooftop garden hung with fairy lights. I carefully selected the meal, making sure there were vegetarian options for my sister and champagne for my mother. I even moved the wedding closer to my hometown to make it easy for my relatives to attend. When they claimed they couldn't afford it, I believed them. Of course I did. I offered to help. When they remained hesitant, I covered everything. Flights, hotels, and clothing. I paid for everything, including my sister's spouse, so she didn't have to fly alone. I told myself it was worthwhile. That family shows up when it counts. I hadn't realized that showing up meant something completely different to them than it did to me. I woke up early on the wedding day. My best friend, who I grew up with and used to trade Pokemon cards with on the sidewalk, texted that he and his partner had arrived safely. They had booked their own tickets and paid for their own accommodations. There was no drama. Everyone was just thrilled to be there. Meanwhile, I was refreshing the airline app for my folks' trip. Landed on time. Good, I thought. They are on their way. I stood in the dressing room, peering out the window every few minutes like a nervous teenager anticipating a date. The officiant arrived at 3 o'clock, smiled pleasantly and said, "Just checking to see if we're ready." I responded, "We might need a few more minutes. Maybe they hit traffic. Maybe their phones died." When I called, it went directly to voicemail. I called again, and there was no answer. My makeup artist finished my hair. The photographer captured gentle images of my bouquet sitting beside the window. I grinned for the cameras. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. At 3:30, my best friend gently knocked and leaned inside. "They're asking if you want to start." I stared at him, my throat tightening. My father was going to walk me down the aisle, he promised. "Let's just give it 5 more minutes," I murmured, producing a painfully wide smile. He nodded, waited with me, and pretended he didn't notice my hands shaking. I called again. Voicemail. Finally, at 3:37 my phone rang. Mom's number. I grabbed it so rapidly that I nearly dropped it. "Oh, hi, sweetie," my mother said. "Sorry, we couldn't make it." I blinked, not comprehending. What? What happened?" She laughed as if I was acting foolish. "Your sister's brother-in-law had a poetry reading. It was important to him, and she didn't want to go alone. We had to support her. You know how family is." I said nothing. She made the silence brighter. "You understand, right?" My father's voice could be heard in the background, which amused me. "Maybe next time." I stood there in my wedding gown, makeup applied, bouquet in hand, trying to comprehend that my parents had chosen a poetry reading over my wedding. Not even her poetry reading. Her husband's brother. And they hadn't bothered to inform me. They just let me wait. Allow me to panic. Let me assume they were lost, hurt, or on their way up until the moment the music should have begun. They allowed me to pay for everything. Let me reschedule the entire wedding to make things simpler for them, and it's still not significant enough. At 3:45, I put my phone away and took a breath. My dearest friend was still standing calmly, ready to catch me if I fell. "Would you," I asked, my voice shaking, "walk me down?" He smiled, without hesitation. "Of course." And so I went, arm in arm with the lad who used to construct tree forts with me in the backyard, and once sewed a Barbie dress with me when my sister laughed too loudly to assist. The ceremony carried on. The vows were said. The rings were exchanged. People applauded and cheered. Somebody cried. I smiled throughout it all. I smiled until my cheeks ached. I smiled till it didn't feel real anymore. During the reception, I laughed at jokes. I cut the cake. I danced with my new husband underneath the string lights I had strung myself. Inside, something hard and icy settled deep in my chest. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the hotel room door had silently closed behind us, I approached the small desk by the window. sat down and opened my laptop. My husband slowly crossed the room, still wearing his business jacket. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he inquired. I nodded without looking at him, my fingers already on the computer. "Yes." He hesitated before saying softly, "You know, once you send it, there's no undo button." I looked up at him and smiled for the first time all day. Tomorrow, everything changes. I pushed send and didn't look back. They say you should not worry about the past on your wedding night. You are expected to look forward. New beginnings, fresh begins, and hope. I tried. But even when I curled up with my husband under the heavy hotel blankets, I couldn't stop thinking about my sister. And what about all the years that have led up to this? My sister was 3 years older and 3 planets apart from me. She was the type of girl everyone gravitated toward in high school. The one with the brand name clothing, the shining hair, and the effortless laugh that made you feel pleased simply to be standing next to her. She was not kind. Not to those who didn't fit. Not for individuals like myself. I used to see that happen in the school hallways. A slight smirk here, a whisper behind a hand there. Sometimes it was clear, a big fake cough when someone walked by wearing thrift store sneakers. Sometimes it was so casual and rehearsed that you didn't notice. But I noticed. I also noticed it when she laughed. At me. Her parents dubbed her selective. They claimed she had standards. "You can't expect her to be friends with just anybody," my mother once told me when I returned home crying after being left out again. "You need to toughen up," my father added. "Not everyone's cut out to be popular," as if I was to blame for not shining as brightly as she did. I was not like her. I had a few close buddies, and that was sufficient. I didn't need the spotlight. Growing up, my dearest friend lived right next door. We spent more hours than I can recall creating Lego towns and making up stories about superheroes who baked cookies instead of saving the world. When we were 8, he proudly brought over a doll he had won at a fair, which we christened Captain Sprinkles. I thought it was the funniest thing ever. My parents did not. "Boys like that usually turn out funny," my father said, loudly enough for me to hear. "No wonder he prefers dolls to football," my mother joked over supper. It wasn't angry, simply dismissive and easygoing, as if they were discussing the weather. They did not hide their displeasure. Not when I chose my quiet, eccentric friends. Not when I valued books over makeup. Not when I was at home sewing posters for the science fair while my sister went to another sparkly party. At some point, I believe they stopped expecting much from me and started expecting everything from her. When we were teenagers, my sister became their trophy, homecoming queen, most likely to win. Every success she had was celebrated as a badge of pride. Every terrible act she committed was dismissed as a natural part of growing up. When she was discovered bullying another girl so viciously that she switched schools, my parents scarcely noticed. "Teenage drama," they explained. "Girls are mean sometimes. It's normal." When I received an academic scholarship from a local college, they scarcely noticed it. No brunch, no announcement to the neighbors. "Well, you were always the quiet one," my mother remarked, smiling vaguely as if that explained everything. I didn't realize I was already learning something significant. Our family's love was conditional. It was loud for her, but silence for me. It showed up for performance, not persistence. When I stopped acting for their attention, they stopped noticing me at all. As we grew older, the divide simply worsened. My sister sailed through life as if it were a stage designed only for her, with internships she didn't get and jobs she didn't keep. Regardless of how many times she fell, the net was always there. My parents praised, funded, and apologized on her behalf. Meanwhile, I worked. I took night shifts. I packed orders for my small online store. I paid rent when they said I was blessed to live at home, conveniently forgetting that I paid half the mortgage. And then, one summer, I met him, my husband. He was a few years older, more grounded, and the first person in a long time to not stare through me when my sister was in the room. He inquired about my work, not hers. When I spoke, he listened without interrupting. He made me feel as if I was enough, just as I was. I fell hard. When my sister met him for the first time, I noticed a spark of interest, as fleeting as a camera flash. She widened her smile, leaned in a bit too close as she laughed, and twirled her hair like she did when she liked someone. Later, she attempted to run into him without me. Later, she messaged him. Nothing obviously indecent, simply a casual, prepared request to hang together without the little sister there. He gently declined, and that should have been it. But it wasn't. Weeks later, she came to our parents in tears, portraying herself as the victimized person. I saw him first, she explained. It's not fair. Never mind that she was already dating someone else. Never mind that he was never hers to begin with. Our family valued performance over truth. She was upset, which meant I was the villain. Maybe you should think about your sister's feelings for once, she said me. Family is more important than some boy, my father agreed. Nobody asked how I felt. Nobody cared. Her backup plan turned into her husband. He was wealthy, dependable, and giving to a fault. Ideal if you were more concerned with the correct last name on wedding invitations than true love. Behind closed doors, however, she never stopped speaking. I settled. He's boring but rich. He thinks he won the lottery. Poor guy. I heard everything. The jokes and casual harshness. She had affairs. He would brag about it after a few drinks, and my folks just laughed it off. Marriage is complicated, my mother commented once, waving her hand. Boys are fragile, my father added. Let her have her fun. But this time, I was not going to be the quiet one who cleaned up her trash. This time, someone had to know the truth. Someone who did not deserve to be humiliated silently behind closed doors, as I had been for years. Perhaps it wasn't revenge. Perhaps it was a sign of solidarity. Maybe I was just choosing the side that no one else had ever taken. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath. Tomorrow would be different, and I would not apologize for it. I awoke to my phone buzzing against the nightstand, as if it was trying to get away. Still groggy, I opened one eye and noticed the missed calls piling up. 6 from home, 3 from mom's cell, and 2 from a number I didn't recognize but had a bad feeling about. I didn't respond. Instead, I rolled over, pulled the blanket over my head, and let the gentle hum of the hotel's air conditioning fill my ears. New life rule. If the situation is urgent enough, they can text. Sure enough, the texts followed. Call us right now. What have you done? Fix it. We need to talk. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand without reading the rest. Across the room, my husband moved, his hair messy, shirtless, and his wedding ring catching the morning light. Is everything okay? He muttered. Family's in crisis, I explained, yawning. It must be Tuesday. He snorted, then pulled the blanket over his head. By mid-morning, I had my first genuine inkling about what was going on. A text from my cousin, who had social awareness. Like a wet sponge. Hi, I heard your sister's spouse dipped. Crazy, the family is freaking out. Dipped. That was one way of putting it. Over the next 2 days, parts came in slowly, like a disorganized jigsaw puzzle missing half of its pieces. Following the poetry reading, my sister's husband appears to have seen the message I sent, or rather, the collection of screenshots, recordings, and documentation. Proof that his wife, whom he had supported through jobs she quit, leases she broke, and goals she never realized, had never appreciated him, laughed at him, or cheated on him. According to what I heard, there had not been a screaming match straight away. Just silence. A protracted, hazardous kind of silence. The type that implied the real damage wasn't even obvious yet. Within a few days, the fallout started to show. My sister's husband left peacefully, without causing a commotion. I filed the divorce papers at the end of the week, and with him vanished the imaginary safety net that my parents had never acknowledged they required. He ceased making payments to my parents' business. When unexpected expenses arose, they stopped paying down their mortgage. They stopped making polite excuses for why their bills were never fully paid on time. It was as if someone shut off a tap they hadn't even noticed they were drinking from. I made my own silent movements. I canceled the automatic payments I had set up 2 years ago to cover a portion of their utilities, emergency dental work, and a co-sign for their car lease. I unlinked my accounts and withdrew my name from the joint emergency fund. I redirected my personal savings somewhere safer, somewhere I wouldn't feel guilty about utilizing. I didn't announce it. There are no major clashes, just a quiet, vanishing act. The trouble with financial disaster is that it does not happen all at once. It leaked. First, credit card minimums are missed. Then, business invoices are paid late. Then suppliers begin calling rather than sending courteous reminder emails. The bank then regrets to notify you that your request for a second line of credit has been denied. It was a lengthy, agonizing process, just as they had allowed their treatment of me to fester over the years. Small neglects, insults, and betrayals continued until the entire foundation rotted through. I spent a lot of evenings simply sitting with it, the solitude, the absence, the peculiar anguish of breaking free from something you'd spent your entire life pursuing. I always imagined that letting go of my parents would be like falling over a cliff. It did not. It was like unclipping a weight from my ankle. I was not falling. I was floating. But that doesn't mean it wasn't painful. There were quiet moments when the pain struck harder than I imagined. For example, when I first started writing thank you notes to visitors, I immediately thought about sending one to my parents before realizing they hadn't been present. Or when I strolled into a store and saw a small Mother of the Bride frame, my palm stretched out instinctively, naively, as if it still believed the appropriate people cared. Or when a stranger smiled and said to my husband and me, "You must have such supportive families." I had to giggle because my relatives simply backed their own egos. When you survive individuals like that, you develop a sense of humor that stays with you, not the laugh-out-loud variety. The dry and fatigued were, of course, kind. The kind you sip like poor coffee in a shabby diner at 2 a.m., relieved to be somewhere else. There were some other adjustments, quiet ones. About 2 weeks after the wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. I glanced at the test in the confined hotel restroom, back against the wall, heartbeat thumping somewhere near my ears. It was not intended, not exactly unplanned, but earlier than expected. I sat for a long time, palms flat against the cold tile, as the world shifted slightly around me. When I told my husband, he simply grinned and pulled me in, saying, "We're ready." "You're ready." And for the first time in years, I believed him. I did not tell my parents, not even when the texts and emails started coming in. Some news does not belong to those who would not be pleased for you. Some milestones are too valuable to give away to people who just see them as leverage. Meanwhile, their circumstances deteriorated. I didn't check for updates, but I wasn't deaf either. Cousins gossiped. Curious texts were exchanged by elderly neighbors. The family group chat, which had long been silenced, buzzed with secondhand worry. Business revenue decreased. A few vendors backed out of negotiations. The bills piled up. They began missing minor payments, then larger ones. It wasn't dramatic yet. No foreclosure notices or court dates. However, the pressure was increasing, like a hairline crack running through glass. They did not show up at my door. Not yet. That would come later, when circumstances had deteriorated to the point that pride no longer outweighed panic. Still, I wondered if they were startled. Surprisingly, the calm one did not fold. That the unseen daughter was the one they had most relied on, without even realizing it. I thought about it on nights when I sat at the kitchen table, papers for the new house sprawled out in front of me, my husband thumbing through listings, our feet tangled beneath the chair. Some nights, my childhood best friend would call. We chatted about the old neighborhood and chuckled about how we inadvertently flooded his garage while building a water slide. I made half-serious plans to travel when the baby was born. He didn't ask about my parents. He did not need to. That was the trouble with actual family. They understood when silence meant survival. By the end of the 3rd month following the wedding, it was evident that my parents were losing control of the situation. Their company advertised a temporary closure for remodeling that apparently never concluded. Their house was secretly listed for preliminary offers, camouflaged as downsizing for retirement. People started to notice. The invitations ceased. The pity began. There are no yelling matches or dramatic confrontations, only a quiet, methodical breakdown. The same manner they had eroded my faith in them over the course of a lifetime. Every day I floated further away. Not falling, flying. The day they arrived, it was raining. Not a lovely, romantic drizzle. The kind of rain that smacks against windows sideways, making you wonder if you should build an ark just in case. It truly does fit. I had just finished folding small onesies, mint green, soft gray, and little yellow stars, when the doorbell rang. Not once. 5 times, quickly, as if someone was holding down the button with their entire palm. My hubby froze at the sound. We exchanged a glance across the kitchen. We already knew. I looked through the peephole. There they were. Suitcases were stacked at their feet. Soggy coats. Tight, fierce smiles. My parents and sister. 3 faces I hadn't seen in months, pushed up against the doorway like a threat. I didn't open it immediately. Just stood there, forehead placed against the cool wood, taking deep breaths. My spouse approached behind me and placed a steadying hand on my back. "We can call now," he stated gently. "Not yet," I muttered. "Some things you have to see for yourself before you set them on fire." When I finally answered the door, they pushed by me without saying hello. Rainwater dripped over the hardwood floor. My sister dropped her duffel bag in the center of the main room. My father positioned himself in front of the television, as if he owned it. My mother gave a firm nod, as if she expected tea service. "We're not leaving," my father answered, his voice steely. "Not until you fix this," my mother added. I slowly closed the door behind them, my heartbeat surprisingly calm. They instantly launched a full attack. They asked me to phone my sister's spouse, to clarify that I had lied, to explain him it was all envy, misunderstanding, and a nasty trick motivated by spite. "You ruined our lives," my mother yelled. "You embarrassed this family," my father added. "You're going to fix this if it's the last thing you do," my sister exclaimed. Their voices clashed, a jumble of rage, terror, and despair. I stood there and let it wash over me. I wasn't their daughter right then. It was a task, a transaction. They kicked a broken vending machine, hoping that the candy might still fall out. At some time, my father made it official. "If you won't help, we're staying here until you do." He crossed his arms and challenged me to dispute. My mother sat firmly on the couch and began talking about dividing rooms. My sister walked toward the guest bedroom, dragging her bag behind her as if she had already chosen. I laughed, quietly. Not because it was humorous, but because it was ludicrous. Because if they thought I was still the girl who would allow them to walk in and take over, they hadn't paid attention. "You're trespassing," I stated simply. They gazed at me, as if I had spoken in another language. "You invited us," my mother remarked, her voice loud. "I didn't even tell you where I lived," I replied quietly. My spouse was already dialing from behind me. I overheard him chatting to someone in that pleasant, efficient tone he reserved for serious matters. My father stepped forward, looming. "You don't call the police on your family." "Funny," I replied, smiling thinly. "I thought the family didn't abandon you on your wedding day." Silence, weighty, and nasty. For the first time, I noticed a genuine terror on my mother's face. It did not take long. A knock on the door came 15 minutes later. 2 cops, professional and courteous. I didn't need to say much, just pointed, handed him my ID, and presented the lease agreement in my and my husband's name solely. The officers requested my parents and sister to leave, allow them to pack up calmly. My sister yelled, "Of course," said I was heartless, said I was destroying what little family I still had. My mother cried. My father mumbled threats under his breath. However, they eventually left, carrying their soaked suitcases back into the rain, under the watchful gaze of 2 extremely patient officers. When the door shut behind them, I collapsed onto the couch, tired. My spouse sat beside me, silent and comfortable. The baby kicked faintly, as a reminder. This is family now, not them. Later we relocated again. We found a house farther away, closer to the type of life we want. We did not send out any address changes. Only a handful of people knew where we were. My best friend and his girlfriend paid us visits on occasion, bringing goofy gifts and stories about travel and late-night diners in cities we hadn't been to before. I established the life I imagined with my parents, simple, supportive, and unconditional, elsewhere. I built it better. I heard about the aftermath via distant cousins and mutual acquaintances. My parents' house, which they loved to brag about, was sold at a loss. The business is no more. The sibling who was always too good for consequences is now sleeping on couches and blames everyone but herself. I didn't reach out. Not until the divorce was official. Not when the bankruptcy was declared. Not when the social media posts were as dry as spilled wine on a dusty floor. I used to believe that cutting them off would be like tearing something out of myself. It's like losing a limb. But it did not. It was like standing up for the first time after understanding you hadn't been broken. You were simply seated in the wrong place all along. I still keep the small mint green onesie folded away in a drawer. The first one I purchased. The one I was too terrified to tell anyone about. The one I understood I didn't need their approval for. My child will never believe that love can only be earned by being useful. She'll never feel small within her own home. She'll understand what family really means. And the best part? They'll never know her name. Sometimes I wonder whether I've gone too far. If sending that message, shutting them off, and calling the police were truly required. But then I remember the girl I used to be. The one who continued to forgive. The one who remained hopeful. And I realized that I did not go too far. They just never expected me to go far. Still, I'd want to know what you think.